Well, to discuss these figures with me is Neil McKinnon. He is global strategist at VTB Capital. Neil, you're one of the few people that has actually predicted that the UK wouldn't grow in the fourth quarter. What do you think now of these figures?
Well, I'm not surprised. Obviously, the figures are very unwelcome, particularly if you're one of the unfortunate unemployed. I think that a very generous assessment of what's going on is that the UK economy is just moving sideways, that there may be some tentative signs of economic recovery, but any recovery is clearly not strong enough to generate any sort of employment, and I think that's going to be the situation for a while yet.
There are other issues to contend with, not only unemployment but underemployment as well. That's another issue, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's also the point as to whether the official statistics are actually capturing what's going on in the real economy, and I dare say they're not. So the actual or the hidden unemployment rate is a lot higher. We know that certain age groups, younger people, some ethnic groups, the unemployment rate is very high indeed, and this is going to be a major challenge for policymakers going forward, not just for the UK but for the major economies generally. It's
going to be a major election issue now, and post-election, as David was saying, we're probably going to see more cuts in public sector as the deficit is reduced. There isn't much hope on the horizon right now, is there? Well,
I think that policymakers need to be very careful. I think there's a real danger of making policy blunders and throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you like. I think that while every major economy faces a serious fiscal situation, the UK is not alone in all of this, as we've seen with the Eurozone debt crisis that's going on at the moment. I think that it's imperative that policymakers don't wreck the economy through implementing short-term draconian measures, cuts in public spending, an increase in public sector unemployment, pay freezes. All of that can't help the economy, which is still probably in recession, in my opinion. So policymakers need to be very careful here.
Well, that brings us around to kind of quantitative easing. There's no real clear sign that quantitative easing's worked very well. So what do you do?
Well, one of the criticisms that can be made of the Bank of England's quantitative easing policy, it's been very narrowly focused in terms of almost exclusively its purchases of the gilt market. In America, the Federal Reserve has taken a slightly different stance through what's called credit easing, and it's purchased a wide range of securities, treasuries, mortgage-backed securities in order to help stabilize the American housing market. I think that as far as quantitative easing here is concerned, it is very debatable as to whether it's actually generating. I guess, again, a generous assessment is, yes, it's helped stabilize the money markets, the banking sector, all of that. But in terms of generating fresh lending, we know from the Bank of England's own numbers on all of this in its lending survey that lending generally remains subdued. Demand for credit, not surprisingly, remains subdued. So, I think that the Bank of England, and Mervyn King knows this, we know from the inflation report last week, is keeping his options open. He's got to. But I think that fiscal policy, more than monetary policy, is going to be the key issue for the economy this year. And again, I would urge and would advise UK policymakers, whoever's in office after the forthcoming election, to tread carefully. I think swinging cuts in public spending, tax increases are not the recipe for economic growth or for getting the unemployment rate down.
Well, if we look at what's happened with both the VAT and the national insurance, small businesses actually saying that the hike in national insurance tax is effectively a disincentive to employ more people.
Absolutely. I mean, I think these are key policy blunders, and for an economy that is still struggling to stage any sort of economic recovery, I just cannot understand why anyone would want to increase the VAT rate or even think of increasing it further to 20% or increase national insurance contributions. That's a key impediment to employers taking on workers. So I'm just surprised and staggered by these measures.
Of course, if you don't bring in measures like this, the deficit isn't under control. Do you think that that's something that we shouldn't be so concerned about at the moment, that we should be looking at that in the future?
Well, for the UK and for all the major economies, clearly there is a long-term fiscal concern with escalation in the budget deficit, sharp increase in debt GDP ratios, but these are long-term challenges. I'm not saying they should be ignored, but the real danger is through implementing short-term squeeze, short-term cuts in public spending. That can't be good for the economy. It'll only make the situation worse. It'll push the economy back deeper into recession. It'll make unemployment worse. So, you've really got to get the economy back on track. You've got to get the private sector back on track on a sustainable footing before you even think about implementing draconian measures.
Do you think we're going to see any kind of fiscal policy before this general election, or are we now almost in the electioneering period?
Good question. I suspect we aren't going to see any measures that can actually be implemented. We'll probably see a lot of talk from both parties as to what they intend to do. All of that, and every party will be taking its stance on taxation, on spending. But I think that the clamour for short-term squeezes on fiscal policy is very misplaced and very dangerous. It's not going to be good for any notion that the UK economy or any of the major economies can stage a sustainable recovery during the course of this year.
Neil Mackinnon, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning.